Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. It is the 24th of January. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm not bad. Not bad at all. Yourself?
Yeah, all good, all good. I'm expecting a busy couple of days coming up. I don't know
Yeah.
about yourself. Obviously,
Feels like
we
it
heard
needs to
from
be, doesn't it?
we heard
Obviously.
from Michael Beale, didn't we? And he said that he didn't want transfer business to go down to the final couple of days, but it looks like it's heading that way.
Yeah, it does. A week to go. We finally saw potentially a little bit of movement yesterday, didn't we? Some rumours at least, which has been we've even been asking for that. I think, haven't we? Particularly after the defeat last week. So, no, I think you're right. I think we could be starting to finally see some plates spinning in Sunderland's favour and maybe get some deals across the line to set up what is probably going to be a busy week. Yeah.
Yeah, Callum Styles is the player sort of in question. I mean, I don't know too much about him personally. I know that we'll obviously be taking a closer look at his stats in the coming days if he does get over the line. What have you made of the links? I know it's been muted with a loan with an obligation to buy.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. He seems obviously, just quick looking at him briefly, is certainly versatile, isn't he? Can play across the midfield and down that left hand side. I suspect it would probably be that left hand side that Sunderland would be looking to bring him in for, either as a sort of a wing back or left midfield, particularly with the injury to Adji Elise and Dennis Erklin's setback. They're very short there. I think Michael Beale said early on that he wants to keep Trey Hume over on the right, didn't he? So to keep that balance. And I think we saw on Friday as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
The sort of lack of that right side. You put a piece out about that, with Pritchard sort of coming inside and him and Job swapping over, but with Hume not then on the overlap, just made things very sort of narrow and congested, didn't it? So if you can get Hume back over on that side, particularly while Roberts is out, then it could prove to be a decent signing in that sense. But it's probably not the forward or the sort of combative central midfielder that supporters are hoping for at the moment. Not that this is the epitome of sort of journalism, but I do have a couple of Barnsley supporting friends and messaged them yesterday, and the message back seemed to be that he's a good player on his day, but consistency is obviously something that he needs to keep up at. So, but I suppose you could say that about a lot of players at the Championship, couldn't you? Otherwise, they would be playing at a higher level if they could keep their consistency up week in, week out. But it's an interesting one. I think, he certainly seems, on the face of it, like I said, quick look at the stats, that sort of a tidy ball player, which would again fit in with what Sunderland have got here. It's just whether, or where rather, he's going to be brought into play. Like I say, I suspect it will be on the left.
Yeah, it's pretty, that's an area that I don't think Sunderland needed to strengthen in the sense of an out-and-out left-back, albeit they do. Given the injuries, it would just be criminal not to, wouldn't it? I mean, if you look at the squad on paper, they are well stocked there, but like you say, Styles is versatile, can play further forward, and it's a transfer that makes sense. Just to touch on the point that you made about obviously the shape and yeah, I did a bit on that after the whole game. Are they missing Patrick Roberts? Michael Beale seems to think so. That area of the pitch is just something that's been really lacking in recent weeks. There's a lack of a natural balance, like you say. If Trey Hume came over back onto the right-hand side, with overlapping runs, that would certainly free up or take advantage of the space that's left from Alex Pritchard when he does tuck inside. I mean, hopefully we're going to put it to him at his press conference later this week to see whether it is actually stylistically part of the plan or whether that's just something that Pritch has naturally been doing because he's used to playing in a 10 in a midfield role, and it's sort of his natural inclination to go in and find space. But people have had some responses suggesting, well, do Sunderland actually need another right winger? I mean, it certainly poses a decent enough question. We talk about Clark. If he were to get injured, what options does Sunderland have? If you look at that sort of right wing area, Abdullah Bar has been playing there in recent weeks, and for what it's worth, I don't think he's been too bad out there. I think that might be his position. He's one of those players who we don't really know where his best position is, but it's a pretty big talking point at the minute, isn't it? If Sunderland have a strong starting 11, minus, obviously the areas that we've spoken about up front, CDM, but outside of that, there's a bit of a lack of depth and players sort of on the same level.
You could say so, yeah. And I think Michael Beale probably admitted that himself, didn't he? Sort of in the derby when he turned around and said that he looked at his bench and just kept getting younger and younger, that he didn't necessarily want to throw them into that environment. There's a lot of, we've said it before, there's a lot of players sort of in that number 10 position across those three positions. They could do a job in there, but which one of them is their actual, the position that they nail down and say, yeah, that is me, that is where I prefer to be. You've got Jewis and Burnett. He could play on the wing. We saw him earlier in the season. He could be one possibly going to go out on loan. I would imagine there will be one or two who do go out over this next week. Players like him, maybe a Triantis at centre-back, Matty midfield, if he's not going to be given any minutes over there. Well, certainly on Saturday, I think he said, didn't he? If there's players by the end of the window, he'll know whether they're going to be needed or not, sort of thing. But it's interesting, I think, when you're speaking on that right-hand side, we saw it against Preston, didn't we, where with Hume back on that right-hand side, Pritchard in front of him, it did work because he could overlap and Pritchard tucked in and it worked well in the first 45 minutes. But when that's not there, Jensen Seal, he did try and get forward, but that isn't his game. You can tell that he is more naturally versed in being a centre-back or possibly even in sort of a central defensive midfield role. I think he played there for PSV a couple of times before he came over. So it is an issue. Patrick Roberts, for as much as there's been the conversation about not necessarily getting the goals and assists this season, you do realise when he's not in the team how much he sort of takes on and carries them forward and gives an outlet on that side of the field as well. So certainly something that they could look at, like you say, with Styles, the other side, if he was to come in, could give a backup. And I think that Alesi injury is the one, isn't it? That with him saying that it's going to be a month, and obviously we know Serkin's not going to be back until towards the end of the season. It does leave a big problem. I know Michael Beale said that Sunderland can move to a back three, and it's something that he is contemplating. If Styles were to come in, that might be something that we could see as well, rather than playing as an out-and-out full-back. I think even during his time at Millwall, he played over 20 games last season in the Championship with Millwall, but again, I think the majority was sort of in the midfield area. I could be wrong, but it's an interesting one. And like I say, that injuries do dictate, and he sort of said that as well, didn't he, with Huggins and Serkin being out, but then to add Alesi on top of it, which was kind of inevitable as well. He came back in and he hasn't really been phased in. He was thrown in for 70-odd minutes against Preston, and then he's gone back to back in 90 minutes. So off a long-term injury himself. So it's probably not surprising that he has picked up a little niggle on his return.
Yeah, I know you and Scott obviously spoke a lot about off-the-field matters at Hull, so we'll try and focus on the pitch. But just as you say there, I've in particular been an advocate for, while I know it's not broken and they don't need drastic changes, just things like we saw Mike Dodds against Leeds change the shape and it worked. I'm not going to say it worked perfectly because Sunderland weren't a dominating side in the game, but they come away with 3 points. And at the end of the day, that's what you're going to be judged on is getting those 3 points. Now, we have seen a consistency under Michael Beale just in terms of starting lineup. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that predicted bit we did, that might be the only team I've ever predicted, and it's actually panned out that way.
Yeah.
But that is, in a sense, of how predictable Sunderland are at the minute, because they haven't at least tinkered or changed. And again, I know a lot of this, like you say, his hand might have been forced by injuries. But why not switch to a back three? Why not see Jensen Sealed at centre-half, maybe push 09 either out to right-back? I just think maybe he's got a bit more mobility than the Dutch youngster. If not, put him into hold midfield. Let's have a look at these things. Now, again, I did a bit sort of last week just on the back of the press conference, balancing between development and grey hairs. And that's the situation that Michael Beale finds himself in, isn't it? With the youngness of this squad. He repeatedly mentions, his young squad, but he has to get a tune out of them sooner rather than later, particularly with all the off-field stuff that is going with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, I suppose really at this time of the season, you should know who your best team is. Now I know there's injuries there, and obviously the circumstances here with Beale only just coming in for a month, but because of him kind of coming in by himself without his own backroom team, Dodds, Michael Proctor, they're still there. It feeds into that where you're probably getting a lot of information from them in terms of how Sunderland have set up the season under Tony Mowbray. Dodds carried that on a little bit. Yeah, like you say, he changed the shape against Leeds. It worked well. Would it work well throughout? I'm not sure. I mean, even last season we saw Sunderland kind of start with a three at the back, then wing backs in. We've seen Jack Clark drop back into the wing back role before. Obviously, you don't want to negate him going forward, given the issues elsewhere. But it is worth thinking about. I mean, the 09 one's an interesting one, to be honest. When he first came to the club in League One, right back is kind of where he ended up shuffling out to. Yeah. I'm not saying that that will be for him, but a lot of people have suggested sort of moving into centre of midfield, where there's been obviously again a lack of depth in there with Neil and Ekwa sort of playing a lot, aren't they? I mean, Neil's I think he's played the most minutes this season outside of Anthony Patterson, I think. So it does. There are a lot of sort of things that you could tinker with, and again, the form probably brings a lot out of this, because if you're winning games, you don't necessarily contemplate these changes, do you? But because of how Beale's tenure started, 4 defeats in 7 games, I think it leads itself to open these conversations, doesn't it? And Beale's probably pushing himself into a bit of a corner with it as well by suggesting that we could go to a back three and things like that. We I think we said it before, Hull, didn't we, with the week's training, even the week before at Ipswich, we need to kind of start seeing a Michael Beale stamp on the team. It's probably the worrying thing is the couple of weeks where he's had a full week on the training ground have ended in certainly Friday like poor performances. Whereas when it was congested, and how much of that was down to Mike Dodds beforehand, you don't know. That there was 1 or 2 signs of encouragement in 1 or 2 places. So it's all a little bit up in the air, isn't it? I think Michael Beale even admitted it last night in the interview he did, that he's, the form hasn't been what he would have hoped for coming in, and it is a worry. There's no doubt about it, with another sort of tricky, what could potentially be a tricky game on Saturday.
Yeah, in terms of transfers, then we've seen a little bit of speculation, obviously linking the club with Kiefer Moore. That seems to have fallen quiet. I know Alan Nixon has suggested, I think he was the one who brought the news in the first place, but forgive me if I'm wrong. He said that, Bournemouth are looking for a permanent transfer. Would that play into Sunderland's thinking? Are they going to go for a Kiefer Moore on a permanent transfer? Personally, I don't think they would. I don't know about yourself.
It doesn't feel like it would fit, does it? No. Even if there was going to be some amendments to the model and the way they're looking at things, it doesn't necessarily feel as though that would be one that would.
Yeah, 31 years old
for them. Wages as well, finances would be a big issue with that. With them moving to the Premier League, I think it's no secret that Sunderland are one of the, their wage bill is one of the lower ones in the Championship. So would they have to sort of break that structure quite a bit to bring someone like a Kiefer Moore in? I suspect probably so, to convince him to move out of the Premier League permanently. A loan would have been ideal, to be honest. He could have come in and potentially done a job over the second half of the season and then set himself up either back in the Premier League or for a move to another club in the Premier League, so to speak. And he came on against Liverpool at the weekend as well, I think. So
yeah, whether
that was to put him in the shop window, possibly, the last week, maybe, but it does feel as though that one's kind of drifted off a little bit. But he is the kind of player that Sunderland could do with it, certainly between now and the end of the season, until they can sort of reassess where they're at in the summer by bringing in sort of maybe a younger version of a Kiefer Moore, perhaps.
Yeah, it's gone a bit quiet on the Macaulay Langstaff front as well. There was talk, that Sunderland and a number of Championship clubs were interested. Just from what we heard, I mean, it did seem to look like a move to League One did seem more likely at that stage. But as you know, January transfer window, anything can happen. Things can unravel or kickstart quite quickly. It's gone a bit quiet on the transfer front, up front in particular, hasn't it?
Yeah, it seems that way, which is a worry, isn't it? Because that's been the one that we've said for. You can see it every podcast that we do, and every time that there's a transfer window open over the course of the last 12 months, but probably even 18 going back to the summer before. So it's the key area there, and centre midfield will be the two. That's probably what's thrown people off a little bit about this Callum Styles link. The fact that he maybe not necessarily, like you said at the start, the initial player that Sunderland would need, but what we spoke about earlier. He could be one that would come in and do a job given the injuries. But the striker one, it's obviously the hardest position to fill, isn't it? Every team would look to strengthen up front if they can to bring goals in. The Langstaff one's interesting. We spoke about it last week, I think, wasn't it? You know, he's a goal scorer. There's no doubt about that over the last 18 months, regardless of the level. But it would be a gamble, but that seems to have gone a little bit quiet as well in terms of a League One move from certainly over the weekend. But something you feel as though something does need to happen over this next week up front, because we've seen in the first half of the season things just haven't quite clicked. Even with Rusyn the other night, I thought he worked quite hard. He made some decent runs that then weren't getting picked out. Now, is that a case of a breakdown in communications with him? You know, obviously he's still trying to get up to speed with the language, moving into a new league from a different country, things like that? Or is that a case of someone not playing with a striker for so long that they kind of aren't getting acclimatised to the runs that a striker is making? Maybe a little bit of both, but one way or another, that is something that needs to be sorted and addressed quickly, you know, whether that be with signings coming in and then tactically with the coaching as well.
Yeah, no, we've had this comment through from Sean Foxton. He says he would have went for Clark Harris and Poku from Peterborough. Strike, obviously, Clark Harris is someone that Sunderland have been linked with in the past, and personally, he's the type of player. But I'm not saying again. I've said in the past, he's another who is towards the latter stages of his career. Do you think that's the type of move Sunderland should be making? I mean, just from looking at it, 29 years old. He's not completely at the twilight stage of his career. He scored, I think, I'll have a quick check, 75 goals or something in 149 at Peterborough. So,
yeah, he's done well at Peterborough, and I think maybe in the summer or last year, he's one that would possibly fit. You know, you sort of think of kind of what Ivan Toney did at Peterborough, don't you? And where that took him to. Obviously, there was difference in the age, but he's kind of one that has flirted on stepping up into the Championship and kicking on, and then not kind of done it when he's been there a couple of times with Peterborough. So he would command a big fee as well, I would imagine, probably more than sort of what Langstaff would command. I think he was close to a move in the summer window, if I'm not mistaken. Possibly Bristol, I'm not sure. But yeah, it feels as though that one the ship might have sailed a little bit on that one for him to go to a side that's, you know, realistically, let's not make no mistake, trying to get back into the Premier League at this stage.
One player who's made a move recently has been Michael Obafemi. Now, I was really impressed with him last year when he was at Burnley, and this is in part where Sunderland's frustrations are coming from. When you see the players who have played well, they've got proven track record in the Championship. He's one. You saw Ryan Giles. He's been heavily linked with a move to Hull. I know there's talk of a £4.5 million obligation to buy at the end of that. So maybe that's where Sunderland would come up short in terms of the finances to pull off that deal. But just, again, no disrespect to Millwall, but you would like to think that Sunderland have the finances to compete with a Millwall to bring in the likes of, you know, Michael Obafemi, who was one of the standout players in the division.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's kind of been the frustration again over the kind of last year or so, you'd say, where you see other teams doing business that you think, oh, well, could Sunderland have gone and done that? You know, we spoke a little bit about Fabio Carvalho, didn't we? I done the piece on him. Now, again, you know, he was credited with the goal the other night. Did he do a lot? Probably not. You know, so he's just a name as an example. But Ryan Giles, you mentioned there, is another interesting one, you know, particularly given if Sunderland are going to go and strengthen that area of the field, would it be better to look at someone like him to bring a loan in? You know, he's been in the North East last season with Middlesbrough, did really well. Would it be better to try and make a move for someone like him on a loan deal for the rest of the season than to bring in a Callum Styles, who is probably not as, you know, he's one who's a bit versatile, who goes across a number of positions rather than a sort of natural in that position. That is a one that would probably be frustrating when you think about it, wouldn't it? Because you saw the quality that he brought to Middlesbrough, and that is why he got the Premier League move off the back of it. You know, that they really wanted him back at the Riverside, didn't they? So it's frustrating when you see other teams doing business that you think or you feel someone could or should be doing. particularly again where we a week away from the close of the window, and you're still waiting for the first bit of movement as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's it. Sunderland, at times since this recruitment model has come in, you feel like they're a bit of a jack of all trades, but then masters of none in some areas of the pitch. So don't get me wrong, like, you need versatility in the squad. You need players who are going to slot in, play here, roll out of different positions. I completely get that, but I think just in terms of, specialist roles, you would like to think that you have a starting 11 at least of that. And I do think Sunderland do, but obviously injuries have hampered that. So in that sense, with the versatility of Styles, that does make sense, albeit, like I've said, I don't think it would have been an area heading into the start of the window, at least, that you would have thought that Sunderland would have strengthened in. Just on the model again, they have been linked with Skelly Alvaro, I believe it is, reports in France, 6'8", 6'7". There's a bit of contrast there, complication as to how tall he is. But again, that's a player that would fit with the model, whether Sunderland go for it or not. 21 years old, signed from Sochaux last year for 4 million, but has only started 6 games in League One. So permanent or a loan, it's interesting.
It's presence, isn't it? And that is something that Sunderland need in the middle of the midfield, in those, certainly in those defensive midfield roles, you would say. We said going forward as well, there's a lot of those sort of lightweight flair players in behind where striker would be. Can you get a bit of presence in there? It's difficult, isn't it? Because you sport on the model. I think the ones that have worked have been the ones that have kind of been in Premier League academy clubs, who are threatening to get into sort of the first team set up at the Premier League, not quite made it, and then are going out and trying to prove themselves again. Jack Clark is the best and the most prime example of that, going from Leeds to Tottenham, not working out. A couple of failed loans elsewhere, but then he really found a home here. But there's others, well, Dan Ballard coming in, Adji Alisi coming in, Pierre Ekwa coming in. I know his form's been up and down this season, but that kind of setup, even Patrick Roberts, I know he's a little bit older, but he's had experience of being at big clubs, Manchester City, Celtic, he's been down at Middlesbrough as well, Derby County, players that are kind of familiar with the leagues and have had a go, whether it be in the Premier League or loans elsewhere, and they're just threatening to make that step. They're the ones that have felt as though they've worked, whereas the last 12 months there's been a bit of a step away in testing the European market a little bit more, where naturally they're going to need more time to step up and make an impact and get used to things. But at the same time, there's quite a few where the jury would still be out, wouldn't it? I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, to be honest. I think Sunderland's best work has come from within Premier League academies. That's not to say that the players who come in from those other clubs haven't been a success. It's just natural that it's going to take longer for them to bed in. And even then, I think when Ekwa came through the door, I was impressed. I was impressed with the way Sunderland handled that. Like they moulded him. They had him at under 21s, and that's what has been impressive about Sunderland is when they've brought young players in, they've utilised the under 21s system and worked it. All right, you can make comments about the level at which those games are played at, but for introducing players to the English game. From I think Edouard Michou played a number of games. He was sent off against Borough on his first one. There was comparisons with Jan and Villa, wasn't there? But still, that's what they've done well. They've managed game time, at that level. It's just sort of we haven't quite seen the step up into the first team that we saw last year. Now it was at this sort of stage, January, February. Ekwa wasn't dropped straight into the first team, but when he did play at that level, you noticed that he was head and shoulders, one of the best players at that level.
No, yeah, they have used it. I think the worrying thing would be if when the players are dropping into the 21s, if they then don't stand out at that level.
Exactly.
There's one or two who've been in and around playing that at that level this season quite a little bit, and they still aren't kind of breaking into the first team. So are they not good enough? Are they still sort of adapting to this culture and being up here in the northeast? Possibly a little bit of both. That might be why Michael Beale's suggesting that one or two will go out on loan, and it'll help them. And I think we had this discussion as well, didn't we? Where would a loan to an English club whether it be National League, League One, League Two, or going back into a sort of a lower European market just to try and build the confidence. That is a tricky situation for the club to put themselves in, because would they probably could do with developing more in this country? Yes, but if you send them out on loans, for example, if you sent out Lewis Amir on loan to League Two or the National League, yeah, he's going to get to grips with the style of football over here more. But equally, a young lad where he's a little bit low on confidence, he could get sort of swallowed up by some of the centre backs the lower down the pyramid you go. So it's an interesting one, and that is a dynamic that Sunderland are going to have to consider, because certainly with him, he's one that has been brought in clearly for the future, because he has got attributes there where you think he could go on and be sort of that sort of imposing striker that Sunderland need up front, but he needs to kind of adapt it to this level in terms of the work rate in the press that we see in the modern game now. You don't really see many strikers that you can get away with just sort of lingering and then just poaching it in the 6-yard box. He showed that in pre-season with a couple of headed goals, and you're thinking, okay, go on. But once we've got into the run of the middle of the season, the work ethic has been one of the things that you've noticed about him. So that is why sending him to a lower league club in this country would probably be more beneficial, because you then tapping more into getting that work ethic out rather than going back into Europe. But these are all things that that they've got to be considering across the board, and that's not just with him.
Yeah, just on that as well, he came off the bench. There's a number of Sunderland supporters saying, that albeit a brief cameo, that they were slightly impressed by what they saw. He looked lightweight. He looked like his physical frame was able to move about a bit quicker. I don't know what you make of that. Just in my point of view, obviously we've spoken about Rusin. There seems to be a desire to see these young players start and play and score goals. That's only natural. But when you've got Rusin, who's played well against Preston, scored, taken out of the team, then complains that he wasn't back in the team, to then now see some supporters call for Hamir to start. You just seem to find, and I get where the frustration comes from, because Rusin didn't score, but then how much of that blame lay at his feet? Like you've said, there was a number of opportunities to pass the ball to him and they didn't. It seems it's just a strange situation again on the strikers. And how many times are we going to talk about the strikers this season? And when you've got 4 but you're only playing 1, you're never going to get a consistent run of games for any of those involved. It's really strange. I just think that they need some sort of consistency, and I think obviously Michael Beale believes Rusin is the furthest ahead, but then those comments on Hamir impressing him in training, his attitude's improved, to then see him off the bench, back on the bench. There has to be some sort of consistency somewhere. And I think if we're seeing Choplin changing up front, that's no further forward to the situation that Tony Mowbray had.
Yeah, I mean, fans are saying that, so I guess that is a step inside the dressing room for what Tony Mowbray, Mike Dodds and Michael Beale have all had on their plate in the time this season. There's been maybe glimpses from each of them, you could say, where you think, okay, we might stick with him, but then it's not really worked out. I thought, when Hamir came on Friday, he was quite live, probably the most lively we've seen of him. I think one of his first impacts was to actually just have a shot at goal. Came in from the left, and his first thought was to shoot. All right, it was a long way out, speculative, didn't get much behind it, but it was a forward. Sort of grabbing the ball and thinking, right, I'm going to have a go here. That is the sort of thing that Sunderland have needed. And I do think, just touching back on what I said, he probably is the one that has the best attributes to potentially come out and be a good striker there. But Rusin is the one who is the furthest ahead, naturally with his age as well, and he scored. So for me, he's the one that at the moment that you stick with. But it seems as though that isn't going to be the case. Michael Beale's already shown that he's going to chop and change on a sort of game-to-game basis, whether it's to set up tactically away from home, or we might see Rusin starting at home more often than not, where they're expected to be on the front foot. It's really difficult. And see, the consistency is the thing. It can't really do the rest of the team very good if the focal point of the team is changing.
Exactly.
And therefore the style of play is having to change. The team needs a player to sort of play into in that central area. just to take the burden off Clark on the left. Obviously, when Roberts comes back, that does a little bit, but they need to sort of take the emphasis solely off Clark, because it's been so much down that left-hand side in the main over the last few weeks. I mean, you can say all season, but certainly over the last few weeks, it's felt like that, even just in terms of the goals coming from him as well.
Yeah, and then obviously, I feel like we're saying this all the time at the minute, but it is another big game coming up this weekend. We'll obviously be hearing from Michael Beale in the coming days in his press conference. Stoke City, I mean, just looking at the table briefly there's still a bit of daylight between the two clubs. Obviously, they've parted ways with former Sunderland boss Alex Neil. Plymouth boss Schumacher has gone in there. Sunderland on 40 points, Stoke on 19. In 19th on 32, so a win could move them to within 5 points, and suddenly Sunderland, you're left looking over your shoulder. You're nowhere near the relegation zone, but you just risk falling out the race for the playoffs quite quickly. And I know a run can put you back on an upward trajectory as quickly as it can unravel. So it's another big game for Michael Beale, particularly after the way, the atmosphere at the home game against Hull.
Yeah, particularly after that. I'm just looking myself, it looks as though they draw quite a lot of games as well. Them coming away from home. So it sort of lends itself to that, doesn't it, given the atmosphere around Sunderland at the moment and their sort of striking issues. But yeah, they will absolutely need a response on the field and from the gate as well, because the crowd have obviously set their stall out at the end of the game last week. The absolute last thing that Sunderland and Michael Beale need this weekend is a difficult start to that game, because then things could turn a little bit ugly inside the ground. And I know Michael Beale said after the game, didn't he, that you need the sports should focus on the team and get behind them as a young group, etc., which is true to an extent. And but the frustrations aren't being vented at the players. Let's be clear there; it's going sort of in the dugout and above there, isn't it? So yeah, it would be. It'd be a big ask if they were to go behind early on. You're going to see a real test. Have to see a real test of character if that were to happen. So that'd be one thing that I think Michael Beale will be really drilling into the players. They need to start quickly this weekend and try and get in front and get the crowd on side before something like that could potentially happen.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we'll be bringing you, all the latest from Michael Beale's press conference over on our other social media channels. If you're on TikTok, drop us a follow on there. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. We've been Are Sunderland. This has been the Wednesday morning briefing. We're in partnership with the Sunderland Farm Museum, and don't forget, you can take advantage of our launch offer, which is still going. It's £1 for just 6 months of coverage, and we'll be joining you later in the week on Friday morning. So catch you all then.